Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto built his own legendary alliance with Tsunami, Tsunade, Mikoto, Ayame, Anko, Karin, Hana, Temari and Tsume? Episode 2. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, Naruto's dream of creating an independent alliance begins attracting powerful allies from every corner of the shinobi world. But as his influence grows, so do the enemies determined to stop him. Now, let's start. Naruto stared into the mirror of his apartment bathroom, shortly after the preliminaries of the Chunin exams. He rubbed his face with water, trying desperately to chase his doubts away. In truth, he was scared, worried, and a whole magnitude of other things. Neji was going to be his opponent in just a short month and Kakashi was unable to train him. Neji hadn't shown hesitation at trying to kill his own flesh and blood, why would he hesitate at killing Naruto? While Naruto, he wouldn't go as far as to try and kill Neji. He would beat Neji within an inch of his life, and break as many bones as he needed to in order to get his point across, but Naruto wouldn't kill Neji. Not only was he a fellow Konoha ninja, but he was also Hinata's cousin and she would be upset if Naruto killed him. Naruto grabbed a towel and wiped his face as he thought back to his own preliminary match. It showed his advancement as a shinobi rather well in his personal opinion. Flashback. Naruto gripped the railings, watching the monitor of the participants' names spin. He smiled when he saw his name pop up. Anyone but Gaara and Lee. He thought to himself. Gaara and Lee would destroy him in an instant. The second name stopped on Kiba's name. Yahoo! We got lucky Akamaru. We have the dead last. Kiba leapt over the railing, landing with Akamaru and setting the pup down. Naruto leapt over the railing himself and walked over, standing across from Kiba. You sure you want to risk Akamaru? Naruto asked. He didn't want to hurt the pup because of Kiba. Kiba gave a bark of a laugh. Akamaru's my partner. Not like I'll need him, I'll beat you in one punch. He boasted. Naruto inhaled and exhaled slowly, refusing to rise to the taunt. He shifted his right foot back a bit. He was right-handed, and so he would want the extra bit of oomph to his strikes. Proctor. Naruto said looking at the sickly-looking Jonin. Start the match please. Naruto said. Hayate looked between the two, a little surprised the well-known hyperactive blonde wasn't rising to Kiba's taunts. Hajime. He shouted, leaping back. Naruto watched Kiba rush in, right fist at back. Naruto ducked under the swing, and struck like lightning. He shifted his hips forward as he drove his fist into Kiba's ribs. Kiba coughed in surprise as he slid back over Akamaru, looking at the blonde in surprise. Naruto took a deep inhale through his nose and slowly exhaled out his mouth. He was in his new mindset when it came to battle. He was a spawned grunt. He had no one important to him, he had nothing important to him. Nothing his opponent would, or could, say would have any effect on him. Kiba bit his hand, calming himself down. He hadn't been expecting that kind of strength from Naruto, or the speed. It hurt, and he had no doubt that he would be sporting a nasty bruise when this was all over. He moved lower to the ground, entering his clan's preferred fighting style. Let's go Akamaru. Kiba said before rushing ahead again. Naruto backpedaled a bit seeing Akamaru rush with Kiba. He ducked under the first swipe from Kiba, but missed the Akamaru who rushed up and bit his hand and released before Naruto could retaliate. Naruto took a shot to the back from Kiba, before he rolled under Akamaru this time. Naruto lashed his foot out and slammed it into Kiba's thigh. Naruto managed to flip away from both of them, landing a good 10 feet away, breathing a bit heavier from his movements. Naruto looked at his ravaged hand. Akamaru's teeth were brutal. Blood dripped onto the floor, yet he couldn't help but give a small smirk. Twice he landed a shot on Kiba. He wasn't having his handed to him. Kiba looked at Akamaru. Let's take it up a notch, boy. Kiba said before holding up the tiger hand seal. Ninja art. Beast mimicry. He called out before lowering to all fours. Naruto could see the brief flashes of chakra before Kiba charged again on all fours. Naruto noticed an increase of speed and flared his chakra to his hands. He had been experimenting with the chakra chains, and so he quickly shot the dual golden chains up into the air, connecting them to the rafters. Naruto then swung himself up into the air, just barely over Kiba as he held himself inverted. He then swung, coiling the chains around his arms, putting more distance between himself and Kiba. Hanging upside down, Naruto looked down at Kiba, his mind whirling to come up with ideas on how to combat him. Naruto swung using the chains and spun in midair, landing a bit of distance away from Kiba. Naruto then launched out 2 more chakra chains into the walls on either side. He brought the ends in his hands together and connected the chains into one. Kiba rushed at Naruto again. He wasn't sure what Naruto was doing with the chains, but he wasn't about to let it slide. He leapt over the chain, going for a swipe at Naruto's head. Naruto dodged to the side, and swung under the chain, but still felt Kiba's claws rip through his cheek. Blood dripped down as he went into the air, grabbing one of his chains dangling from the rafters and quickly connected it to the ground. Naruto held himself up on the chain, flexing his chakra to stick to it. The chakra chains were rather fascinating. If someone but the creator touched them, it would drain their chakra. Then the creator had to touch the same chain and the chakra drained would be transferred to them. By putting chains in the arena, Naruto was quickly trapping and boxing Kiba in so he'd have no choice but to hit the chains. Naruto leapt to the next chain and allowed himself to lower as he extended the chain to the ground. He barely felt a dip in his reserves, but that didn't mean his strength could keep up. He was feeling a slow burn in his arms and abdomen from maneuvering about the chains. Naruto placed his palm to the ground and brought another chain out before attaching a kunai on it. He then purposely threw it at Kiba, watching Kiba dodge to the side, and allow the kunai to embed into the statue behind him, the statue now sporting an inch-wide hole in its head. Kiba was starting to get confused, and worried. These chains were becoming bothersome, and they would no doubt start hindering his movements if he allowed too many more to be created. He reached into his supply pouch and pulled out a soldier pill. Akamaru. He called out and the white pup leapt, landing on Naruto's head before leaping off again, catching the soldier pill and landing on top of Kiba's back. Ninja art. Man-beast clone. He called out before a puff of smoke enveloped the two and standing on Kiba's back was a clone of Kiba. Naruto's eyes narrowed. So, Akamaru could turn into a clone of Kiba, but the puppy's chakra coils were probably underdeveloped and so it couldn't be held without using a soldier pill. Naruto watched Akamaru go high, leaping over the chain in the middle of the room, while Kiba ran underneath it. At least, Naruto hoped those were the two. Naruto stepped onto the attached to the statue and ran at the two. Kiba put his claws in front of him before leaping up at Naruto. Gatsuga. He yelled out, before spinning and becoming a spinning vortex of razor-sharp claws, aimed to maim Naruto, with Akamaru doing the same. Naruto kept track of Kiba and Akamaru before dropping down on the chain, grabbing it and swinging at the same time. He allowed Kiba to start passing by him before he came around in full swing. Both feet slammed hard into Kiba's ribs, knocking him from the vortex. Naruto was pleased to feel 3 cracks. Naruto didn't however notice Akamaru land on a wall and start drilling towards him again. The vortex slammed into Naruto who at the very last second pulled off a substitution. He landed near the statue, standing on his chain as he watched the log he used get torn to shreds. And the log that saith, "Believe in my protection, and I shall come to your aid when you need it most." Amen. Naruto said, followed by a chorus from all the Konoha shinobi at Jonin rank and higher saying out, Amen. Naruto's substitution however hadn't come fast enough as he felt a small trickle of blood slide down his back from his ravaged back. He pulled off the torn jacket, now wearing the mesh under armor that was also torn. It was time to end this. Naruto wiped his blood from his back. The human body was mostly water. Water froze, and with the Hyoten, Naruto froze his blood into long thin needles. These needles flew at Kiba and Akamaru, making a few eyes narrow, and a pair widened in surprise. Naruto then took off running down the chain, forming more needles from the blood on the floor. He had to use a surprising amount of chakra to force it to happen, the distance being greater than his usual control allowed. These needles struck Kiba and Akamaru from behind, making them both hit one of Naruto's chains. Naruto leapt off the chain while Kiba looked over to Akamaru in surprise at seeing him revert back to being a puppy. That was the end. Naruto brought his heel down onto Kiba's head, slamming him into the ground, knocking him out. Hayate checked on Kiba and then made his call. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. He shouted. Flash back end. Now Naruto had a meeting to report to. Sarutobi wanted to speak with Naruto and the blonde wouldn't be late to the meeting. Naruto closed and locked his apartment, knowing Karin had the spare key and would be able to use it. Naruto leapt up onto the rooftops and took off running towards the Hokage Tower. When he landed, he walked in calmly. He smiled, thinking about the meeting with his grandfatherly figure. He opened the office door. Gigi. Naruto called out as he walked in. Anbu, leave. Sarutobi said as Naruto walked in. Four shadows left the room, leaving the two alone and the door closed. Naruto wondered about privacy, but he was suddenly lifted into the air and pinned to the wall. His eyes widened in fear, having not even seen Sarutobi move and place a kunai to Naruto's throat. Gigi. Naruto called out afraid, the killing intent suffocating. Who are you? What are you doing in Konoha? Why are you posing as Naruto Uzumaki? Sarutobi asked as he kept the kunai pinned against the blonde's throat. Gigi, I am Naruto. Naruto said, realizing he wasn't looking into Hiruzen Sarutobi's, his grandfather figure, eyes. No, he was looking into the eyes of the kami of Shinobi, the man who is said to have mastered every non-clan jutsu in Konoha. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed. He wasn't detecting a lie from the imposter. How did you get Hyoten Naruto? Sarutobi asked, still not releasing him. The Kyuubi. Naruto lied swiftly. She says I'll gain several from her, some I already have. Sarutobi pressed the kunai into Naruto's throat a little more, drawing blood. Don't lie to me, Naruto. Naruto winced, feeling the cut in his throat. Fine. Just, please, let me down and I'll explain everything. Naruto said. He couldn't keep this secret from Sarutobi, not when he was like this. Sarutobi backed away from the blonde, just out of his reach but not that far out of reach. He kept the kunai out and waited for the explanation. Naruto began to pace, rubbing his throat. 3 steps, back and forth. It's completely insane. I still have difficulty believing it. I still have difficulty understanding it even. Naruto said and slowly withdrew the book. I'm stuck in some pervert's twisted fantasy, twisted little game. Naruto said seriously looking at Sarutobi. I have to level up in this game, and every few levels I get a perk point. Kekai Genkei are considered perks I can get. Naruto said and opened the book, showing Sarutobi the proof, where the stats were, the skills, the medals and the perks. Sarutobi's jaw dropped in a bit of surprise as he looked over the proof. Naruto was right, it was completely insane and difficult to understand. But yet, he stared at the proof, at the various medals, seeing words shift, seeing scroll bars that Naruto interacted with. The book itself floated from Naruto's hands and flipped to the first blank page where words began to scroll across. Hiruzen Sarutobi, Sandaime Hokage of Konoha and Kami of Shinobi, Every word that Naruto Uzumaki speaks is the truth. I would appreciate you keeping this from anyone else, including your student and Naruto Uzumaki's godfather, Jiraiya of the Sannin. Sarutobi's jaw dropped even more at the words that the book wrote itself. How do you know these things? He asked. Who are you, the creator of this game? I am the creator of this game. I will not say who my identity is, for that will ruin the surprise. As for how I know these things, I will say that I have friends in high places. Now, do I have your solemn word that you will not reveal this to anyone and simply go with Naruto's lie? I will not have my fun thwarted by an old man because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. The words scrolled across quickly. Sarutobi licked his lips, thinking about the fact the creator had friends in high places. That said something along the lines of being on level with a god. You have my solemn word that I will keep silent. If Sarutobi's hunch was right about the creator being a god, then he had nothing to gain by telling Naruto's secret. The book snapped shut, and landed in Naruto's open palms before he took the book back, and held it to his side. Sarutobi looked to the blonde in front of him, and saw fear in the boy's eyes, seeing him hurting. Sarutobi dropped the kunai and hugged the blonde. I'm sorry my boy, he said to Naruto, who quickly hugged Sarutobi back. Naruto was shaken, his entire perception of Sarutobi was altered. He knew that as a Hokage, Sarutobi had to be stern when needed, but he never expected to see those eyes, the eyes of a true shinobi warrior. It's okay Ji-san, Naruto said softly as he pulled away. I'm just a little shaken you know. Sarutobi nodded and motioned the boy to sit in a chair. Sarutobi took his own seat behind his desk, watching the boy sit in front of him. Do you have any other Kekkei Genkai? Sarutobi asked. Naruto nodded. The Sharingan, in the advanced Mangekyo form. I'm close to having the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and something called the Rinnegan. Sarutobi nodded. So in essence, you could have every Kekkei Genkai? He asked the blonde. Naruto shrugged. I'm not really sure. It seems I get a new one unlocked whenever I have a Kekkei Genkai user, or when I defeat one in battle. I got the Sharingan from Mikoto-chan. Sarutobi nodded. Do you care for the girls you were with Naruto? He asked seriously. Naruto leaned back. Most yes, however some like Anko who only wanted an itch scratched. I have no problem leaving it at just that. If she would like more than just a partner to turn to in the future, then I will oblige her as well, quite willingly. He said. Sarutobi nodded. You do know that having a harem won't be just about right. Naruto nodded. Each woman has their quirks, their differences, there will be conflict, and there will be financial issues no doubt. I plan to start spamming shadow clones to do D-ranked missions, try to bring in more money. Naruto took a deep breath. Now Ji-san, when were you going to tell me about my parents? Sarutobi winced. That was one thing that cut him deeply every time he thought about it. I wanted to, believe me I deeply wanted Naruto, but what would you have done with the information? Naruto paused as he thought about it. What would he do with the information? I don't know. He answered honestly. In return though, can we talk about my parents? Naruto asked pleadingly. Sarutobi nodded and then started to tell the blonde various stories he remembered. Some were humorous, some were serious, but all would be precious to the blonde. Konoha Hospital, same time. Kin lay in the hospital bed, staring up at the ceiling bored out of her mind. She was being held there overnight for no damned reason. She didn't have a concussion, but the Konoha nin were adamant that she stayed. I feel fine. She yelled out, knowing no one cared or would bother to hear her. She sighed before narrowing her eyes, remembering a bit of rage at the blonde claiming to be an Uzumaki. She balled her hands into fists. 5 minutes with the blonde, 5 minutes and she would have him begging her to just end him. She heard a knock at her door, breaking her from her musing of mutilating a blonde imposter. Enter. She said, calming herself. She was a little surprised to see Dosu walk in. He walked over to her and looked down at her as she sat up. How are you feeling? He asked as he placed a scroll down on the bedside table. Minor headache, nothing that won't go away. She said, taking the scroll and opening it. That Naruto Uzumaki in the Kill Me orange jumpsuit used those golden chains you told me about. We're even now. Dosu watched Kin read the note before shrugging. I'll leave you be then. He said. Kin stared at Dosu's note, giving him a nod of thanks. So the blonde really was an Uzumaki. She ran a hand through her hair standing up. She had to go find him, quickly. She destroyed the note. A couple months back, Kin found out what Dosu feared. In Oto, fear was knowledge and that knowledge was worth a small fortune. In exchange for not telling anyone, not even Orochimaru, Kin had asked Dosu to keep an eye out for someone using the chakra chains that the Uzumaki were known for and to stay silent about his search. Dosu upheld his end of the bargain and she would uphold her own. She opened the window and leapt out, hitting a roof and rolling with it. She quickly descended down into the marketplace, her Oto headband tucked away. It wasn't hard to get information about the blonde, and pointed in the right direction of his apartment. Most of the people seemed to dislike him, but she wasn't quite sure why. They kept referring to a law. She watched the blonde enter his apartment, and Kin swiftly ran up the steps. She knocked on the door quickly. Naruto turned, hearing the knocking on his door just as he entered. He shrugged and turned, opening the door, only to have the Oto Kunoichi push him inside and kick his door closed. She had him pinned by the wall with a kunai to his groin. Show me the chakra chains, she said in a stern voice. Naruto scratched his head a bit. He then held his left hand out, and allowed a chain to come out, the golden chakra quickly twisting into a chain. Kin smiled broadly and quickly removed the kunai at the sight of the chain. She tackled the blonde in a hug, literally knocking him to the ground. I finally found one, she said loudly and kissed Naruto. A male Uzumaki, she said with a grin. Naruto glanced up at Oto Kunoichi. Okay, I'm lost, he said completely confused. Kin sat up, straddling Naruto's abdomen. Allow me to explain to you, Mr. Uzumaki, she said, smiling genuinely for the first time in so long. My name is Kin Tsuchi, and my best, and only, friend in this entire world is an Uzumaki. Sort of, she said. The Uzumaki clan was separated into two parts. The first, were like you, the royalty. You are the last heir of the Uzumaki clan. The second was like my best friend, guardians for the royals. Naturally they were still one family, it's just some were more suitable for a certain role. The guardians also couldn't use the chakra chains. Kin said and leaned down, placing her hands on Naruto's chest and kissing his jaw. Now, Tayuya and I have both sworn to find a male Uzumaki, and assist him in rebuilding the clan, she said, moving her hips lower to grind herself against Naruto's groin. Truth be told, Naruto was still confused as hell. But here he was, being offered hot, willing. What straight man would say no to that? Naruto reacted like any straight man and got hard, his now uncomfortably pressing into the pants of his jumpsuit. Well, I think we're a little young for rebuilding the clan, but I don't mind practice, Naruto said, biting Kin's ear. Kin gave a soft moan at Naruto's words and actions before getting up and helping the blonde to his feet. Kin quickly pulled her top off, showing the black sports bra. That was quickly removed as well, before she jumped at the blonde and began to kiss him. Naruto was responsive to Kin's touches, feeling her hands run over his chest. His hands grabbed her arms and quickly spun her around. He had a naughty idea. Quickly, he used the chakra chains and made sure they wouldn't drain her chakra before he bound her arms behind her back and Naruto lifted her up. He took her into his bedroom and dropped her onto the bed with her head hanging off the bed. Naruto undid his pants, and pulled out his, ready to put it to good use. He grabbed the base and moved it to Kin's open mouth, feeling her tongue lash over the top of his length as he pushed deeper into her mouth. Kin's eyes widened a bit as she felt the blonde's press towards her throat. She gagged, as the blonde worked deep into her throat. She felt the muscles of her throat spasm, trying not to take something so big. Her eyes burned a little bit as she felt the blonde very slowly in her mouth. When she showed up to give herself to the Uzumaki, she hadn't expected to do something so kinky. Naruto slapped Kin's, before squeezing one tight as he kept thrusting into her mouth. He pulled his out of her mouth, letting her gasp for breath. Is this what you want, Kin-chan? To be in Uzumaki's? Naruto asked, slapping Kin's again. Yes. Kin cried out. She could feel herself getting soaked already. Please Naruto-sama, please use my throat as your warmer until you blow your load. She said, reaching out with her tongue and tickling the swollen head. Who could argue with something like that? Naruto grabbed the side of her head and worked his back into her mouth, feeling her teeth scrape against his to spur him on. He went faster this time, not going quite as deep and making her make wet gagging sounds. Despite this, Naruto had to admit Kin was good. She kept licking like a good girl. Kin groaned, feeling her airway getting abused by Naruto's. She rubbed her thighs together, trying to get a bit of pleasure herself and moaning some. Her eyes went wide at the feel of Naruto forcing all of his down her throat, making her gag and choke rather hard. Naruto showed mercy and pulled him out of Kin's throat, watching her rasp for air. He helped her sit up and moved to stand on his bed. Naruto said, moving his to the Oto Kunoichi's face and laying the wet appendage on her face. Kin felt the spit covered against her cheek and eyebrow and the balls against her lips. She opened her mouth and drew both in. She is slow and deep, drawing a groan from Naruto. Ever so gently, she used her teeth, putting pressure on his balls before pulling back and lapping at the base of his and the top of his balls with her tongue. Please, she licked again. Naruto-sama, she kissed the right side of his sack. She pleaded, looking up to him as she licked along the underside of his. Naruto groaned and grabbed Kin's hair, earning a yelp and a low moan from her as she opened her mouth to take Naruto's again. Naruto went with a quick pace, not quite making her deep throat. He was close. Naruto felt his sack tighten and gave a loud groan, jamming his all the way into Kin's mouth and throat before he released, making her spasm a bit with wide eyes. Kin couldn't believe she was being forced to take the flood of cum down her throat, but she couldn't help but enjoy it. Finally, when she could pull back, she gulped down a few mouthfuls of air, choking a bit. Naruto rolled Kin onto her back and quickly removed her pants and underwear. He pushed them off the bed before rolling her onto her knees. Naruto grabbed the chain with one hand and his with the other. Slowly, he began to push into her, feeling her yield to him. Kin let out a low moan as her torso was held up and the blonde filled her. Oh Kami, give it to me, Naruto-sama. She begged. She had never needed to be like she needed to be now. Naruto grabbed a hold of the chain a little tighter before his other hand went to Kin's and began to molest it, groping and squeezing vigorously. Naruto then rolled his hips, working his in and out of her to get used to the tightness. Slowly, he began to thrust instead of rolling his hips, working his deeper and deeper. He picked up the pace though, quickly giving Kin what she wanted. Kin gave a series of low moans when Naruto first started out. Her eyes widened a bit as he felt him go deeper and start to go faster. It was slowly driving her insane, the pleasure was getting to be too much. She felt his hand leave and she actually whimpered until she felt the hand. She cried out, arching her back and letting her nipples scrape the sheet as she continuously got pounded into. Naruto gave a small grunt as he felt her tighten up from him slapping. It slowed him down, but he quickly worked harder to make up for it. His hand drew back and slapped her again, making her cry out again and tighten up again. Naruto gritted his teeth as she tightened up a lot and cried out even louder. He must have brushed her G-spot. With a smirk, Naruto shifted his angle and began to shove against that spot over and over. Kin's eyes widened and she fell forward. It was getting to be too much. She felt the coil of her orgasm tighten up and she rolled her hips back to the blonde, unable to take having her G-spot hit over and over again. Yes, 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 thank you Naruto-sama, thank you, she cried out. Her cries became a scream as a body-racking orgasm washed over her and her eyes rolled into the back of her head. Naruto gave a low groan of pleasure, feeling her tighten up on him. She was like a warm velvet vice and he couldn't stop himself. He came inside of her, filling her up with his cum and feeling it slide out against his shaft and his balls. He eased out once he was finished and stood up. He had an idea that he was going to work with. He rolled her onto her back and spread her legs. He wrapped a chakra chain from high on her inner thigh to the opposite shoulder, before doing the same with the other side. He pressed the center, where the two chains overlapped at both her back and front, slowly melding the chains together. He then made the chains tighten up, spreading her legs far apart to show off her flexibility. Naruto then formed two more chains and jumped to attach them to his ceiling. He did this a second time before picking Kin up and attaching the chains at her hips and shoulders. She was now fully bound, and hanging in the air. Naruto then headed to the kitchen and got some cooking oil. It was the best thing he had for lubricant at the moment. He went over to Kin and quickly began to rub the oil in along, making her give a few mules of pleasure. Kin watched him, unable to do anything to stop him, not that she would, and loving the fact that she was tied up. Kin asked, watching Naruto stand up. Of course Kin-chan, I'm going to make sure that every one of your holes are mine for pleasure and no one else's, he said as he began to rub some oil along his. He rubbed the tip against, getting prepared to penetrate her hole. Kin licked her lips. Please be gentle Naruto, she said seriously. I've never had anyone take me there, she added. Naruto nodded, his mind briefly flicking back to Mikoto's words on how it could hurt. He eased himself in, the oil doing its job of lubricating them both. He rubbed Kin's thighs and cheeks, trying to relax the muscles. Don't tense, he told her. Kin nodded, taking Naruto's words in mind before she relaxed her body and felt him slowly fill her. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head at the pleasure. Sure, there was a bit of pain, but nothing more than what she felt as a competent kunoichi. She quickly whimpered as she realized she couldn't roll her hips in this position, leaving her to the mercy of Naruto. Naruto smirked when he heard her whimper. She must have realized why he had tied her up like he did. He grabbed her hips and slowly began to pump in and out of her body swinging with the chains that would securely hold her in place. She whimpered again, much to Naruto's delight, as he finally bottomed out inside her, filling her with his. Naruto used her momentum on the chains, and his own speed to slowly begin her faster. Kin began to breathe a little more ragged as she felt the blonde she called out, trying desperately to roll her hips against Naruto's. Alas, her predicament left her unable to. But she would get him back. She had some good genjutsu. Naruto reached down with one hand and rubbed Kin's, still thrusting into Kin's. He would turn her into his personal toy. Whenever he was tired from training for the finals, he would have Kin and Karin both licking at his and balls to relieve some stress. Kin began to pant, trying desperately to try and get more air into her system, but this was leaving her breathless. She thrashed and squirmed, tightening up her inner muscles to try and make the blonde come faster. She couldn't even speak, it was too much effort. Naruto paused and held her hips firm, before starting to thrust using hard and fast thrusts. He grunted with the exertion of force, watching her face twist in pleasure. She couldn't keep up with his pace that well, but he was sure that it was okay. Kin cried out, unable to take it. I'm coming Naruto-sama. Her entire body jerked against her restraints as she had her release from Naruto. She just couldn't take it. Naruto gave a low moan of appreciation and pleasure as he released for a third time, feeling his balls ache a bit as he filled her with his cum. He felt it drip out against his balls and slowly pulled. It felt great. Naruto then slowly removed the chakra chains, helping her stand shakily. Go take a shower first. Naruto said with a smile, pointing to his bathroom door. Kin nodded before walking on shaky legs to the bathroom. Maybe a bath instead. She didn't think he would mind too much. Naruto sat on his bed and pulled his book out, flipping over to the level up page. Congratulations. You had with Kin Tsuchi. Plus 1000 points, plus 5 genjutsu, plus 5 throwing weapons. Congratulations. You received the bronze, an enemy kunoichi, medal. Plus 600 points. Naruto was disappointed he didn't receive a level up, but he supposed it was due to him being so far into the levels as he was. That, however, didn't stop him from thinking about the fact it was called Kin an enemy kunoichi. He flipped over to the medals and tapped it. Bronze. Have with a genin ranked kunoichi of an enemy or neutral village. Naruto supposed Oto could be an enemy village, maybe it was a neutral village. He hoped for the latter. Naruto then closed the book and stretched a bit. He watched the bathroom door open and Kin walked out, obviously nervous. What's up, Kin-chan? Naruto asked, standing up, about to head into the bathroom. Can I talk to you about something important? Kin asked to move and sit on the bed. Naruto nodded and sat back down watching the nervous girl. Earlier she seemed so damned confident, like she could take on anything. Yet now, what's wrong? He asked. I need to talk to your Hokage if possible. She said and curled up a bit. Oto is planning on invading Konoha. She whispered, not wanting the blonde to hurt her. Naruto's eyes widened. When? He asked. Konoha needed to prepare, an invasion was a big thing. And with all the Chunin and Jonin occupied with the Chunin exams. Why? What did we do to Oto? Kin winced at Naruto's questions. From what I understand, the finals of the Chunin exams. And as for why, Orochimaru is the leader of Oto, if that helps any. She said. Naruto's eyes widened a bit at the name of the snake Sanin. But he had a bit of time, so he stood up and rushed into the bathroom. He took a quick shower, scrubbing hard in the hot water. When he came out, he got dressed and gathered his things. Come on, he told Kin. He led the Oto girl to the Hokage tower. Ji-san. We have a problem. Naruto called out as he entered. Apparently Oto plans to attack. Naruto said quickly, getting Sarutobi's rapt attention. That's some claim to be making, Naruto. Do you have any proof? Sarutobi asked, lighting his pipe. Naruto gently nudged Kin forward, and she was obviously scared. Even if Sarutobi was in his late 60s, he was still Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, a man hailed as the god of Shinobi. Naruto moved back and let Kin talk, telling Sarutobi how little of the plans she knew. Even Naruto knew there wasn't much, but Kin was also only a genin. Expendable in the eyes of most villages. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Sarutobi said, smoking his pipe. Now, what are we to do with you? He said. Naruto tapped his chin. Well, officially we could say she was captured. Some of the founding laws state that the one that captured her would get first claim to her. As a POW, she'd be considered a slave. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. Surprised, Naruto remembered some of the village laws from when the boy was forced to read them by the civilian council. Aren't you a bit young for a slave, Naruto-kun? Naruto scratched the back of his neck. Well, yeah, truth be told. But do you honestly think an alternative would be better? I'd take care of her at least. Naruto said. Plus I like him. Kin said, clinging to Naruto's arm a bit. He's not 2 or 3 times my age and I know he'll treat me with a bit of respect. Sarutobi nodded before looking at Naruto. Do you know how much paperwork you're causing me? First Karin, now Kin. He asked the blonde. Sorry, Ji-san. Naruto said, scratching his head. Sarutobi shook his head before glancing at Kin. Will Tayuya be participating in the invasion? He asked. Kin nodded. She's one of Orochimaru's elite bodyguards. She'll be nearby. Sarutobi nodded and dismissed the two, shaking his head. It was going to be a long night of paperwork. Naruto ran both hands through his hair as he walked through the streets of Konoha. The sun was beginning to set, but despite this he didn't want to go to his home just yet. He made his way to his favorite place in the whole village, on top of the Yondaime Hokage's head. He sat up there, watching the sunset as he tried to figure out what to do. He was sure leaving and wandering around wasn't going to solve the problem, but staying home wouldn't have helped. Karin and Kin got into a fight. Naruto had long since realized that this game was a double-edged sword in several aspects. First and foremost, women had a righteous fury that no man could ever stand against. If it was even suspected that Naruto was playing the heartstrings of even a single woman, then he would likely be made an example of by the rest. Personalities conflicted, causing problems within. So having him get with multiple women could become rather problematic. When Karin and Kin got into a fight, Naruto wasn't able to get a word in edgewise until he practically blew up at them. The brief flare of killing intent had helped get their attention, where Naruto basically explained to them both that as the last male of the Uzumaki clan, he fell under the CRA and would be encouraged to be with as many women as possible. The two girls had almost started tearing into him, and each other, when he raised his voice over their protests. He then further went on to explain that while he may be encouraged to as many women as possible, that he would treat each individual as just that, an individual. Naruto had long since understood what it felt to be it by the villagers. He wasn't considered human to some even still. He wouldn't put that pain on anyone else. However, in a bout of frustration and uncertainty, Naruto had left, asking the girls to at least think on his words and cool off. Naruto's little apartment wasn't big enough for 3 people to stay away from one another while they all cooled off. Tempers would likely flare and problems would ensue once more. Standing, Naruto let out a sigh before walking away from the Hokage monument, heading towards the Uchiha clan compound. He hadn't seen Mikoto since a bit before the Chunin exams. Perhaps spending time with Mikoto would help him out. She came from a clan, so no doubt she would understand clan laws a bit more. He pushed the gate open, seeing that it was unlocked, and headed for the large building he had entered last time. Naruto reached up and knocked on the door, unable to help but notice the fact that something was cooking and it smelled good. Mikoto jumped a bit, having not been expecting someone else for the evening. Coming, she called out as she wiped her hands on a dish towel and headed to the door. She opened it up, and saw her favorite blonde. Naruto-kun. She called out and hugged him close, smothering his head in between. Naruto flailed a bit at being smothered between Mikoto's before he wrapped his arms around her waist. He managed to extract his head from them and gave her a bit of a smile before scratching the back of his head. Mind if I come in? He asked. Mikoto gave a smile and nodded, moving to let the blonde in. She then went a bit into motherly figure mode. You look like you have something serious on your mind, Naruto-kun. She said, leading the way into the kitchen. Naruto sighed and nodded as he sat in a chair, Mikoto surprising him by sitting in his lap. Part of me feels like an idiot. He said, resting his head against Mikoto's shoulders as she held him. During the second part of the exams and shortly after the preliminaries, I ended up getting with 2 girls. Naruto said. He figured he'd get her reaction out of the way. Mikoto nodded. As a clan head, she understood clan laws quite a bit. She didn't like them, she didn't want either of her sons to be placed in the CRA. That being said though, she did understand them and knew that Naruto was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he didn't get women of his own choosing, then the civilian council would pick for him. I take it they found out about each other and it didn't go so well. She asked. Naruto nodded. Yeah, I might have yelled a bit too before leaving to cool myself down. He admitted. Mikoto nodded once more in understanding before she kissed Naruto's cheek. It's understandable, Naruto-kun. Different personalities will clash. She said and watched him. In fact, shortly after the second exam started, Ayame-chan and I found out about each other. She said. Naruto winced. He wasn't sure if he wanted to think about that fight. Mikoto-chan look I. He felt Mikoto place her finger against his lips, interrupting his sentence. Relax. She said with a small smile. Nothing bad happened. Well, sort of. We did have a big fight, mostly shouting. She did throw a ladle at me which almost set me off. However, that being said, we're both more mature girls and I was able to sit her down and explain things to her, explain clan laws and what would happen. She's not blind to the abuse you've suffered at the merchants over the years. While nothing physical happened too often, you were unable to get proper food, equipment, clothes, everything even. Mikoto said and removed her finger from Naruto's lips only to kiss them. She understands that if given the circumstances, it would be better for you to pick who you wish to be with. While I do not necessarily like the fact you have to be with multiple women, I do understand. Naruto scratched the back of his head in thought for a bit. And Ayame. Is she still willing to be with me? If she's not, I'd understand completely. Mikoto giggled a bit and leaned down, kissing Naruto on the cheek again. And that is why we're both still willing to be with you. She whispered softly to the blonde. You understand. You're more worried about what she'd feel than anything. You always give, and give, and give and barely take any for yourself. Mikoto said and hugged the blonde. We, Ayame and I, know why you really pull the pranks you do in Naruto-kun. You do them so that you can give someone, somewhere a laugh. You don't care about the scorn, or the training you get from them. You just want one person's day to be a little bit brighter. You'd go so far for others that you would burn yourself out. Hokage-sama told me how your team passed the second exam and what you did. Naruto scratched the back of his head. How did he refute a woman who was right? The villagers didn't know it, but Naruto could tell when his pranks made a few people happy. After all, he was no one and nobody paid any attention to anyone. It wasn't hard to become invisible for him. Mikoto snuggled against the blonde a bit from her position. Now, I have a bit of more serious talking to do. Hokage-sama told me you have the Sharingan and that you got it from the Kyuubi. Is this really true? Naruto nodded before channeling chakra to his eyes and staring into Mikoto's onyx eyes with his now Sharingan. He then pushed almost triple the chakra required and mutated them to the Mangekyo Sharingan. I also have the more advanced version. He said, coming clean about that. Mikoto's eyes widened as she stared at the advanced version. She noticed that Naruto's looked like chains linking together. Who did you? She asked, mortified at the thought of the blonde killing his best friend. Naruto saw the mortified look in her eyes and tilted his head a bit. Who did I do? He asked. Kill. Mikoto asked, standing up, utterly mortified and terrified at how Naruto seemed so nonchalant. She could see the Sharingan given the Kyuubi, but the more advanced form. Naruto's eyes widened. No one. I swear. Naruto said, standing. He hated the thought of killing someone, but to kill someone for power. That was insane to him, asinine even. Kyuubi gave me the more advanced version. Because she was controlled by Madara Uchiha, she was able to give me the more advanced version. In Mikoto's distressed state, she didn't catch the lie from the blonde. In her relieved state at the blonde's words, she didn't even think about it anymore. She put a hand over her heart and breathed a bit heavier. She didn't want to think of a Naruto who could be so heartless to kill someone, nonetheless his best friend. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, she said and hugged the blonde tight. The Mangekyo Sharingan is a bit of a stain on our family because to obtain it, the Uchiha in question has to kill their best friend. Naruto deserved an explanation about why she freaked out about Mangekyo. Naruto deactivated the Sharingan and hugged Mikoto back, rubbing her back. I understand Mikoto-chan. Naruto said and sat down, pulling her down into his lap again. Now, what's that delicious smell I have smelled since I was outside Mikoto-chan? Naruto asked. That would be from me. Naruto turned, a bit surprised to see Ayame there, her hair wet like she came from a shower. Mikoto-san invited me over for dinner, a girls' night sort of deal. She was in the mood for something spicy and ramen, so I gave her a recipe for some of our spicy ramen. Ayame said, walking over to Naruto. She leaned in, over his shoulder, and kissed his cheek. I didn't realize that we would be having dinner and maybe a bit of fun. Ayame said, watching as both Mikoto and Naruto blushed a bit. Mikoto cleared her throat and then vacated the blonde's lap, only to playfully glare at Ayame taking her spot. Sorry, I forgot to mention that Ayame was here. It sort of slipped my mind when I was trying to help you out of your funk. Naruto gave both girls his foxy grin, getting them to blush. Well, I guarantee that I am out of my funk, and I'm a touch hungry. Some ramen would be nice, he trailed off. Ayame rolled her eyes a bit. Some, he says. Some to him would be an entire meal for 5 people. I'd swear he's part Akamichi, but I've never known them to have blonde hair. Mikoto giggled a bit at Ayame's words. Well, we can make sure Naruto doesn't gorge himself on dinner. After all, our favorite blonde does need to save room for dessert if he's good. Mikoto gave a wink before heading to the stove to finish cooking. Ayame blushed a bit at Mikoto's meaning, but she supposed she deserved that one. That's true. She then got off of Naruto to go help Mikoto make a bit more for Naruto. Naruto leaned in his chair a bit, watching 2 of his precious people cook and enjoying the smells of the ramen. The spices were different, but he noticed similarities between Ichiraku's spicy ramen and what the girls were cooking. He gave a small smile, watching the 2 work like a team. He wouldn't give up on Karin or Kin, but he knew that if nothing else, he would have Ayame and Mikoto. Naruto's mind then wandered to the upcoming Chunin exam finals and he frowned a bit. He still didn't have a proper trainer for the Chunin exams. Sure, leveling up in the game made things easier. Gave him more strength, speed, endurance, chakra control to work with and a higher aptitude to various skills he would need as a shinobi. However, this also did not mean he would instantly be a master of it. For instance, Naruto's ninjutsu repertoire was limited to the chakra chains, shadow clones, regular clones, substitution, and his transformation jutsu. He also had limited use of his Mangekyos and Hyoten's abilities, but more training with them would be preferential. Taijutsu, Naruto had no real style, same with Kenjutsu. In short, Naruto was still boned against Neji unless he could figure out a solution. It then hit him. Naruto was in the Uchiha clan compound. Most major clans had 2 libraries. A jutsu library with all the scrolls on jutsu that their clans used, and a library that housed books on general information, such as history or even tactics. While in truth, the thought of learning all those jutsu from the Uchiha clan was enough to make Naruto almost giddy, he chose to force it down. He needed the basics down before he went to the advanced stuff. As Naruto thought about it a bit more, he thought it would be best if he could get any scrolls on the Hyoten that the Uchiha had as well. It wasn't like he could ask a Hyoten user about how to use his abilities, they were unfortunately all dead. Hey Mikoto-chan, Naruto asked. He waited for her to give a small sound of acknowledgement. Do you think I could look at your clan's library? I'm, admittedly, not the brightest shinobi out there, he said, scratching his head a bit. And I want to change that. I have a month of no team training or missions, and I want to make the most of it. I figure with my shadow clones and, with your permission of course, the Uchiha clan's general information library, I could make a good chunk of progress on changing that. Sure, Naruto-kun. Mikoto said and smiled over her shoulder. She then created a shadow clone, and watched as the blonde made about 24 to follow hers. Naruto scratched his cheek. Would you mind if my clones were to also look at any Hyoten Jutsu scrolls your clan might have? I sort of also gained the Hyoten when I gained the Sharingan. He said, and to give an example, he created an orb of frozen water in the air. It was only the size of a grape but large enough to get his point across. Mikoto looked understandably surprised. Sure, she said, chalking it up to Kyuubi giving Naruto the Hyoten when he faced the Hyoten user in Wave. It wasn't like she could use any of them, or Sasuke for that matter, and if it helped the blonde then she would allow it. The only reason her clan had those scrolls was so they could recognize the jutsu being used. Naruto watched the two women go back to work and finish up in about another 20 minutes. When the food was served, Naruto decided to slow himself down. He was in the presence of two people that were important to him. He ate slowly, savoring each and every bite. He had to admit, the blend of spices might have been different, but it was still just as delicious, if not more so. However, dinner didn't last forever and it was soon time for dessert. Ayame managed to beat Mikoto to Naruto's lap, straddling his waist and running her hands through his blonde hair. Would Naruto-kin like his dessert now? She asked in a low sultry whisper at his ear. Naruto then noticed she stuck her tongue out at Mikoto, who was glaring at the ramen waitress. Absolutely. Naruto said with a bit of a grin. However, I'm trying to figure out how to not slight either of you. Mikoto and Ayame shared a bit of a laugh. Only you, Naruto-kun. Mikoto said and kissed the blonde's neck a bit. Just make a shadow clone to carry me, it will be fine. Naruto gave a nod. That worked for him since Mikoto suggested it. He put his hands together in the seal and a clone appeared, scooping Mikoto up bridal style. Naruto watched as she kissed the clone's ears, whispering things to the clone for only the clone to hear. Naruto stood up, picking Ayame up with him. He felt her legs wrap around his waist and his arms around his neck as he carried her after his clone carrying Mikoto to the bedroom. Age before beauty, Naruto-kun. Ayame said, seeing the glare Mikoto shot her. Mikoto got an idea then and kissed the clone. Go ahead and take me to Naruto-kun. She said, and the clone looked to the creator, who gave an uncertain nod. Naruto followed in with Ayame from behind. Once Naruto put the two girls down on the bed, the clone was dispelled before the real one was grabbed by Mikoto and pulled down into a kiss, her hands roaming over his body. Like you said, age before beauty, Ayame-chan. Mikoto said after a bit and noticed the ramen waitress glaring now. Mikoto removed the dark blue t-shirt she was wearing, before she unzipped her black pants, working them off and pulling the blonde towards her ample chest. The lacy white bra was soon gone, and her nipples were being on by the blonde, making her moan out as she felt his hands slide into her panties, rubbing against her. Naruto moved down Mikoto's body, kissing slowly and spreading her legs a bit to allow him to pass through her legs. He then lifted her legs up into the air and removed the panties before spreading her legs again, ducking his head down between them. Naruto tentatively began to lick at Mikoto's. To be fair and honest, Naruto didn't exactly have a whole lot of experience giving oral. However, he already enjoyed the taste of Mikoto. She tasted like he was licking a sweet, ripe honeydew melon. It wasn't exactly like that, but it was a sweet and pleasant taste that made Naruto want more, working his tongue deeper into Mikoto's, feeling her hips rise up to his mouth. Mikoto let out a low moan. The blonde wasn't bad at what he was doing, not great, but it was more from inexperience than anything. She briefly mused what was with her getting oral from an Uzumaki during a threesome. First Kushina, Now Naruto had started it off with giving her oral. Mikoto watched as Ayame removed her black tank top, wearing a light blue bra underneath, which was quickly discarded so she could rub, watching as Naruto worked his tongue into Mikoto's body. "Come on, Ayame-chan. Get out of those clothes and I'll help you out," she said, sliding one hand into Naruto's hair and grinding her hips up, making the blonde's nose brush against her, giving her even more pleasure. Ayame quickly discarded her pants, before removing the matching panties she wore with the bra. While not as lacy as Mikoto's, she still liked them because they were a good color. She moved and straddled Mikoto's head, running her hand through the hair of the raven-haired woman. Ayame let out a low moan as she felt Mikoto's tongue run over her. Naruto glanced up, seeing Ayame's heart shaped as she straddled Mikoto's head to allow the Uchiha matriarch to have her own fun. He heard the quiet low moans from Ayame, no doubt enjoying the way Mikoto's tongue played over her. Not one to be outdone, Naruto moved his mouth over to Mikoto's and swirled his tongue around the sensitive nub as he worked two fingers into Mikoto's, her hips bucking against him as she gripped Ayame's with one hand, and Naruto's head with the other, trying to get more pleasure out of it. Mikoto moaned into Ayame's as she worked her tongue into the girl. The blonde eating her out was slowly showing as much natural talent at oral as he had shown at actual. It could be refined, no doubt, but it was still good. She rolled her eyes up to look at Ayame, who had her breath hitched, and was grinding her hips forward. Ayame didn't have the stamina of a ninja, and she didn't have a rather inexperienced blonde doing the work. She could feel the coil of her orgasm building up. She held Mikoto's face at her tighter, her breathing getting more and more ragged as Mikoto began to moan a bit more into her. Ayame reached back with one hand and grabbed Mikoto's, making the raven-haired woman let out an even louder moan. It was finally too much for Ayame and she let out a loud moan of her own and had her orgasm, all over Mikoto's face and in her mouth. Naruto must have realized that Ayame was close to being released, because the next thing Mikoto knew was that he was on her, his fingers hammering into her. Mikoto let out a brief scream that turned to a high moan as she came, her back arching as her fluids covered Naruto's face and in his mouth. Mikoto breathed heavily as Ayame rolled over to Mikoto's side. Naruto grinned a bit, watching the two girls lay there and pant from their orgasms. Naruto crawled up along Mikoto's body and kissed her, slipping his tongue between her full lips and tasting Ayame in her mouth, as he felt Mikoto's tongue slide against his own and into his mouth. Ayame looked surprised at seeing Naruto kissing Mikoto, and felt more than a little aroused at the sight. She was then further surprised when Naruto pulled away from the older woman and pulled Ayame in for a deep tongue-filled kiss. Ayame could only give a few moans, tasting herself and Mikoto at the same time. Mikoto pulled Ayame from the blonde and cupped the ramen waitress' cheeks. "You didn't think I wouldn't get in on the action, did you?" she asked in a low sultry whisper against Ayame's lips before she kissed the other girl, using full tongue and lips pressing her leg between Ayame's legs, feeling the other girl grind against Mikoto's thigh. Naruto was speechless at watching two girls kiss. He turned his head away, hiding the blush on his face. That was far different than anything he was ever expecting from either of them. And he couldn't help but feel aroused at what he had seen. Naruto felt his jacket get grabbed and he was suddenly slung around onto his back, staring up at Mikoto, who had a sly grin on her face before she started kissing Naruto's neck. He lifted himself up as he felt his jacket get pushed off his shoulders, and removed from his body. The mesh under armor was next to go, thrown off to the side. Naruto watched as Mikoto moved lower, kissing him down his abdomen as her hands worked his pants off, along with the boxers, tossing both to the side. He looked at Ayame, who licked her lips a little bit. He was hard, and he felt Mikoto's brush against his, bringing his attention back to the Uchiha matriarch. Mikoto moved to straddle the blonde, staying raised up on her knees as she reached between her legs and grasped Naruto's hardened hand. She rubbed the tip against her wet, before she slowly lowered herself onto it, giving a moan as her eyes closed. The pleasure felt great. She slowly sank further down along Naruto's, until she felt his hips against. Naruto stared up at the content look on Mikoto's face as she clearly enjoyed the feeling of his filling her body. Slowly, she rolled her hips forward, making him slide out some, before sinking back in. Naruto watched as she put her right hand on his abs to steady herself. She was just as tight as the first time he had with her. He took her left hand and held it, staring up into her eyes as he rolled his own hips up to her, watching the pleasure on her face. Mikoto felt the breath in her chest catch a bit as she stared into the beautiful blue eyes. It was almost like Naruto was staring into her soul. She broke eye contact with Naruto as her head leaned back, feeling Ayame kiss at her neck from behind now, her more petite frame holding Mikoto, helping her ride the blonde. Ayame had felt a little left out, but understood how special the blonde could make someone feel. She knew that she would get her turn, and not from a clone but from the real thing. She smiled at Naruto as she held their clasped hands with one of her own. She was sure that Mikoto would get in on her time with Naruto as well. Naruto caught Ayame's eyes as she held his and Mikoto's hands. They were family, dysfunctional on a whole other level, but these two loved and cared for him, as he did for them. In those moments, he forgot about Karin and Kin, instead reveling in the moment with Ayame and Mikoto. He shivered a bit though when he felt Ayame's other hand cup and fondled his balls slowly, her slender fingers running along his sack. Mikoto felt the coil of her orgasm begin to tighten. With Ayame's back running against her spine, Naruto shivering inside of her, and just the knowledge that she was with both of them was beginning to get too much. She focused back in Naruto's eyes, staring down at them as she went just a little bit faster. Naruto stared up at Mikoto, feeling her body slowly lose control of the orgasm that was building. Her inner muscles gave spasms around his thick length, massaging and milking him, prepping him for his own orgasm. The way Ayame also fondled his balls was helping him along as well. He sat up, pinning their hands between his and Mikoto's chests as he leaned in and kissed the beautiful MILF as he finally had his orgasm, giving a few grunts into the kiss as he shot his cum deep into her body. Mikoto watched the blonde sit up, and felt his lips on her own, their tongues quickly battling as she felt the blonde release inside her. The feeling of the hot, life-giving seed sent her over the edge and her back bowed a bit as she gave a loud moan of pleasure as she coated Naruto's with her juices, her hips bucking a bit into him. Ayame watched the two kiss, and have their orgasms. She licked her lips, feeling Mikoto's rapid heartbeat. Carefully, Ayame helped Mikoto off of the blonde, with Mikoto giving a soft whine of disappointment. "You had your turn, now it's mine," Ayame said and helped Mikoto to lay at the side of the blonde. Ayame was glad for the large bed as she took the other side of the blonde, pulling him in between her legs. Ayame softly kissed Naruto's lips. "It is my turn, right, Naruto-kun?" she asked in a pouty voice. Naruto smiled at Ayame and kissed her lips. "Of course, Ayame-chan," he told her. He grasped his length and gently rubbed his tip against Ayame's wet entrance before slowly pushing himself in, moaning as he did so. She was tight and just the feel of her holding him close to her body was a good feeling in the pit of his stomach. Ayame gave a low moan of pleasure as she felt the blonde penetrate her. She was still amazed at how endowed the blonde was, and it would always seem to feel good to her. She locked her legs around his waist at her ankles, gently kissed the blonde again as she took his right hand in her left and just held his hand while feeling him roll his hips into her body. Naruto pulled his lips away from Ayame's before he turned her hand to him, leaning in to kiss the back of it. He kissed her on the lips again, feeling her right hand slowly slide up into his blonde spiky locks. He rolled his hips into her a bit faster, moving his in and out of her body just a touch faster. It was a special feeling, holding her and being with her like this. Mikoto was beginning to feel left out of this before she scooted over and did the same as Ayame, by taking their hands in her own. She leaned into Ayame's ear, gently biting her earlobe. Gently slide your nails down his back, not too rough now, she whispered to the younger girl. Her other hand moved along Naruto's ribs, gently scratching and making the blonde shiver. Ayame shivered, feeling her body spasm around Naruto as the blonde shivered. Whatever Mikoto did had made him respond quite well. She moved her right hand from his blonde hair and gently slid her nails down along his spine, making the blonde's back arch and his penetration just a bit deeper. Naruto couldn't believe the sensations he was dealing with. First Mikoto's nails, then Ayame's, it was quite a pleasant sensation. His eyes locked with Ayame's as he began to thrust into her body just a touch harder, lifting her hips up off the bed, and making her breath catch in her throat. Mikoto moved and kissed the side of Naruto's neck, pressing against his side, enjoying the feel of his muscles coiling and uncoiling with every thrust. Come for me Naruto-kun, she whispered in his ear. Fill our Ayame-chan up with your cum, she said, rubbing her hand along his other side, watching as the blonde closed his eyes in concentration. Ayame's breathing was getting more labored as she felt Naruto twitching inside her a little bit. She was so close to the orgasm that she needed. She could tell the blonde was just as close, a little ahead or a little behind. She grabbed the blonde's hair and pulled him in for a kiss, pulling him into her body tighter as she had her orgasm, moaning into Naruto's mouth as she tightened up and milked him for his cum. Naruto couldn't take it, the sensations became too much for him. His back arched and yet he kept his mouth connected with Ayame's as he released inside her, filling her with his cum. He felt it leak out of her, and knew that it was a solid orgasm. He eased himself from her body, looking into her eyes before kissing her lips gently, a quick peck. Mikoto smiled a bit before rolling over and making space for the blonde. He took the space and she very quickly snuggled up to his left side, enjoying the feel of his arm wrapped around her. She draped an arm over his waist and kissed his chest. Remind me that I have something for you tomorrow. It slipped my mind when you were first over here and then you got busy with the Chunin exams. Naruto gave a nod and wrapped his right arm around Ayame, holding her close to his body. He felt her arm snake along his waist, just over top of Mikoto's. Mikoto-chan, would you mind if I sent Karin and Kin to you tomorrow? Maybe you can help them understand this whole thing from a woman's point of view. He asked. Mikoto nodded and laid her head on the blonde's shoulder. She knew that the next day he would be stiff and sore from lying with two women like this, but if she knew she was blonde, then he wouldn't complain. That's fine Naruto-kun, I'll talk to them. You just focus on your training. I expect to see you to beat Neji's. Naruto chuckled a bit. Yes ma'am, he said and kissed her on the side of her head before looking at Ayame. And what do you think about this whole thing? He asked her, wanting to know. Ayame kissed Naruto's cheek. I don't like having to share with you, but you promised me you'd make time for me. That's all I'm asking for, is just a bit of me time every now and then, she said before resting her head on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto nodded. I promise, all of you will get time for yourselves, he said and held them just a little tighter. Let's get some sleep, he said with the other two agreeing. Next morning, Naruto woke up last, surprised that he hadn't felt either Ayame or Mikoto move, but not really surprised by it either. He had been exhausted. He sat up and rolled his shoulders, trying to work the kinks out of them as he stood up. He looked to see a set of clothes laid out for him along with his game book and grabbed them. He walked out of the bedroom, following his nose to the smell of breakfast cooking. He now wore a pair of dark gray Anbu pants, combat boots, a black t-shirt, and a gray unzipped Anbu vest. They fit him surprisingly well, and he had a feeling he knew whose they were. It felt strange wearing a genocidal maniac's clothes, but hey, free clothes were free clothes. They weren't stained with blood. He saw Mikoto at the stove, cooking something that smelled delicious. He also noticed 3 boxes on the table, boxes that looked covered in dust. Hey Makoto-chan, what are these? He asked, going over to the boxes. Mikoto turned to look at Naruto and bit her lower lip. Naruto made the dark shinobi warrior look surprisingly sexy. She refocused on the question. These are the personal effects of your mother, Kushina Uzumaki. Journals, cookbooks, jutsu scrolls, her swords, and even her old Anbu armor. It's all there. Mikoto said, watching Naruto's eyes widen. She had the things for some time, even though Fugaku wanted her to get rid of them. Naruto went over with trembling hands, slowly opening one of the boxes with wide eyes. He pulled out a black leather-bound book and opened it, looking over his mother's handwriting. It was large, and looping but very neat. He covered his hand with his mouth as he read it over, completely in awe, in surprise at the words on the pages. He had something of his mother's, some part of her to carry on. Naruto tucked the journal away before creating 3 clones, allowing them to carry the boxes back to his apartment. He also planned to have the clones talk to Karin and Kin, telling them to come talk to Mikoto if they still wanted to be with him. Naruto took a deep breath, shuddering a little bit. I got to go Mikoto-chan. He said and went over to the Uchiha matriarch, hugging her tight. I cannot say thank you enough. He said, holding her. Mikoto returned the hug, knowing the blonde needed it. I understand, Naruto-kun. Go train. And here. She handed him a small sack of food. You need to keep your energy up. Naruto headed out of the house and ran across the rooftops, going to the Hokage monument where he could have a moment of peace. Sitting down, he pulled out the book for the game and opened it up. He had to get this done first. Congratulations. You had with Mikoto Uchiha. Plus 900 points. Naruto banked the level up points he got from it, noticing that Mikoto's worth had decreased. Congratulations. You had with Ayame. Plus 250 points. Congratulations. You received the Bronze Marathon Man Medal. Plus 500 points, plus 5 acrobatics. Congratulations. You received the Bronze Hat Trick Medal. Plus 900 points. Naruto noticed he was close to leveling up again, and scratched his head a bit. He was kind of hoping to level up, especially after he hadn't after having Kin. Flipping to the medals, Naruto tapped the Marathon Man. Bronze Marathon Man. Have 2 women at once. Naruto then tapped the Hat Trick. Bronze Hat Trick. Have with 3 women in 24 hours. Naruto then flipped to the stats page where words appeared at the top. Bonus from Marathon Man Medal. His acrobatics rose by 5 points and he winced a bit. If he was after the Hirishin Jutsu, then he was pretty far away. He counted at least 5 levels before he would have enough speed and acrobatics. Still, Naruto didn't plan to squander this. He had a total of 10 points. 5 from gaining the level, 2 he still had left over, and another 3 from his perk. He boosted his chakra levels up to 60, giving him enough for the Hirishin. He now could leave it alone. The other 5 points went into acrobatics, bringing it up to 30. Now he needed a grand total of 45 points until he was able to get the Hirishin Jutsu. Naruto flipped over to the skills page, scratching his head as he stared at the 56 skill points he had. He really had no damned clue what to put them to. Finally, he decided to pour 50 of the points into sealing. He had a complex as hell seal on his body, and might as well be able to understand it better. Sealing 150 points, expert level. You are now able to unseal a Biju without killing the host. Naruto blinked at the words, unable to possibly conceive that level of ability. Would that make him better than his father? Naruto snapped the book shut as he leaned back a bit, laying on the hard rock of his father's head. Being able to unseal a Biju, without killing the host, it was unfathomable to him. He could literally unseal the Kyuubi if he wanted to. It was a power high that made him worried. Naruto shook his head and went to the perks, taking the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, and being done with that skill branch. He would have to practice those jutsu soon. Naruto sat up and tucked the book away, pulling out his mother's journal and began reading. Naruto was furious as he ran along the rooftops. He had just finished reading his mother's journal, an endeavor that took most of the morning. Now, 5 hours since he had got the damn thing, he was heading towards the hot springs. He had a super pervert to accost, and possibly kill. The only good thing he got from that morning was that Kin and Karin managed to make up, and make out, with each other and his clone when it got there. Naruto landed near the hot springs and got his anger under control. It was still there, but he wasn't leaking out killing intent anymore. Naruto saw the white-haired Sannin in a tree, looking over the fence of the hot springs and giving a few perverted giggles. Naruto took a deep inhale, calming himself as he channeled the Hyoten. Using the water from the nearby springs, he froze the Sannin's feet to the tree. Nothing noticeable, it only came up along the sandals the man wore. It wasn't going to keep the pervert down long, but for what Naruto had planned, it was plenty. Naruto took a deep inhale, filling his lungs to capacity with air before cupping his mouth with both hands. Pervert! He yelled out at the top of his lungs, knowing the results would be instant. Naruto heard Jiraiya curse, before Naruto clapped both hands over his eyes and heard the sound of something crashing, followed by a super pervert's pain-filled screams for mercy. None was given, of that Naruto was sure. Thank you Naruto, he heard Kurenai say before he felt a hand in his hair. Yeah, good going Gaki. I wanted to hurt something today. Anko said. Count to 30 before uncovering your eyes or else, she trailed off. Naruto had no doubt that the threat would be backed up, and so began to count to 30, going slow. When he got to 30, he removed his hand from his eyes to see nothing but a broken and beaten pervert on the ground. Naruto cracked his own knuckles followed by his neck. It was time to dish out his form of punishment. Forming his chakra chains, he quickly chained Jiraiya down to the ground, making sure the Sannin's hands were away from one another and bound firmly so he couldn't make any one-handed seals. Naruto then stuffed Jiraiya's notebook into his mouth to keep the Sannin from making any noise. Naruto then made a shadow clone which transformed into a bucket. Naruto scooped up some of the hot water, before going over to Jiraiya and dousing the super pervert with it, waking the man up from his unconsciousness. Jiraiya jerked, and let out a muffled yell as he awoke. He then noticed his predicament and began to violently jerk against the chains. When he noticed the blonde, he settled with a glare. Naruto returned the glare. Jiraiya of the Sannin, Gamma Sannin, self-proclaimed super pervert, author of Ika Ika, student of the Sandaime Hokage, teacher of the Yondaime Hokage, and my godfather. Naruto said in a low tone, knowing that it wasn't common knowledge. Jiraiya's eyes widened and he began to say something muffled, trying to squirm out of the chains. Oh no, you're not getting away. Naruto said, creating a few more chains. My entire life, I have had a godfather who was meant to watch over me, take care of me, and he's off gallivanting about chasing tail. Naruto shook his head, beginning to pace a little bit. Not once have I seen you. He said looking at Jiraiya. Not once have I gotten a birthday present from you. Naruto shook his head again. You owe me. He said heatedly. I get you had your ninja duties to attend to, but not once could you take a break and come visit me. Jiraiya listened to Naruto's words, and looked away in guilt and shame. He could have taken a break to see the blonde, but he hadn't. He had drowned himself in work. In his research to hide the gnawing guilt and looking at the blonde, he wondered what would have happened had he taken the time to train him a bit. Naruto cracked his knuckles a bit, and rolled his neck and shoulders. Now, you have one of 4 options that will be a start to paying me back the debt you owe me. The first is I start wailing on you with everything I have. with every jutsu in my arsenal and make it look like you just took on all 9 biju when you were a genin. And for reference, I know the shadow clone jutsu, and can do the multi-shadow clone jutsu as well. Naruto paused to see Jiraiya shake his head. Option 2. I take the rustiest, dullest, most bent piece of crap kunai I can find and slowly castrate you with it with no anesthetics. To this Jiraiya shook his head even more violently. Option 3. You tell me everything about Nagato Uzumaki. Who he is, what he specializes in, whether he's alive or dead, you will tell me everything you know. Naruto said and watched Jiraiya's eyes widen a bit, but Naruto didn't give Jiraiya a chance to say or do anything. Option 4. You swear to every god and goddess you can think of, and the holy log itself, that you will never do or think anything perverted for the rest of your life. Tsunade Senju herself could strip, douse herself in oil and start rubbing against you and you cannot do anything perverted about it. Naruto said hearing Jiraiya start whimpering. Jiraiya was in a state of limbo. Naruto had him, figuratively, by the balls and was twisting. Chained down, there was nothing that Jiraiya could do to stop Naruto from doing the first 2 options. He figured that the Sandaime was watching in that crystal ball of his, and was going to do nothing to stop Naruto unless he went to kill Jiraiya. The third option would rip open some old wounds he really didn't want opened. After all, he wasn't sure if Nagato was alive or dead, and he had a soft spot for all 3 of the AIM orphans, but he had lost them after he left. Option 4 didn't really need mentioning. If Tsunade heard he swore off the ways of the perverse, she would start doing things to tempt him. Naruto bent down and removed the man's notebook from his mouth. So which option will it be? Naruto asked. Could I teach you for the finals instead? Jiraiya asked, pleadingly. Naruto scoffed. Nice try, but you'll be doing that no matter what option you pick. If you don't teach me, well, I'll just pick 2 of the options myself, instead of 1. Jiraiya whimpered, having no doubt that the blonde would pick the 2 most painful. Alright, I'll tell you about Nagato. He said with a sigh. He was tempted to take the beating, but he knew better. The beating an Uzumaki could give was like nothing he had ever experienced. Kushina had really done a number on him, but thinking about a whole slew of clones wailing on him didn't exactly make him comfortable. Naruto let Jiraiya go, knowing he could easily track the man down and give him the rightful beating he deserved if necessary. Naruto then sat down and listened as Jiraiya went into great detail about the AIM orphans, and not just Nagato. The next day, Naruto found himself at a training ground with a waterfall, overlooking an area with a small lake. He noticed a few girls there already and rolled his eyes at the fact his new sensei was going to be peeping. Jiraiya soon arrived and began to hash out a training regime. The first week, they would work on chakra control, making sure that Naruto was able to perform the basic chakra control exercises necessary. Naturally, Naruto was a bit irked at this, but decided to hear Jiraiya out. The second week would be used for toad summoning, which explained the chakra control to Naruto. The third week, if Naruto was able to summon the toads well enough, would go towards a few offensive and defensive jutsu. Once Naruto was able to use the jutsu in a combat situation, he would be able to take a break for the rest of the month, just to make sure he was rested and healed for the finals. It wasn't a bad training regime, and it would give Naruto plenty to work with. He knew his father summoned the toads, and would gladly accept the contract and try to prove himself to be just as good of a summoner. Alright Gaki, I want you to go over to that tree and start walking up and down it for an hour. That will show a good mastery of the tree walking exercise. Jiraiya said an unsealed telescope. Naruto shrugged before moving to the tree and starting to climb it without his hands, going up and down, sometimes running when he got bored. He heard a few perverted giggles from Jiraiya and shook his head. Naruto would let it go, at least for now. He had a training exercise to perform. About halfway through his training exercise, he heard a soft click of Jiraiya closing his telescope. I've been meaning to ask Gaki. Jiraiya started, his face set in a serious look as he stared down at his notes. How did you know I was your godfather, nonetheless about Nagato? Jiraiya asked. Naruto paused to look over at Jiraiya before continuing the run up and down the tree. You told my father about Nagato. He told my mother, but not very much thought. Her journal mentions him a few times, and how she inferred that he was an Uzumaki. He said. It wasn't how he found out about Nagato, but it was still the truth. Jiraiya looked up from his notes. He needed something fresh, something for inspiration. Hey Gaki, have you ever felt the comfort of a woman's flesh? He asked, wondering if his godson would give him a bit of inspiration. Yes, Naruto said as he kept attacking the tree. And I won't help you at all with your perverted books, and if I so much as think you're peeping on me, I will make your life utter hell. Ask the Anbu about December 22nd 4 years ago if you think I'm joking, or that you'd be able to escape me. Naruto said seriously. The Anbu refused to try and catch the boy anymore. The one time they were called out, they had caught him, but he had gotten his revenge. Naruto sighed as he reached the top of the tree and back-flipped off, landing on the ground in a crouch. Okay, bored now. I have ADHD that stems from having massive amounts of energy due to the furry tenant I have in my gut. I need something new, something fun, or I'm going to go insane. Jiraiya glanced over at the blonde. He couldn't blame the blonde for being bored. Why don't you start running up and down the tree again? I'll make it interesting. Naruto shrugged and put one foot on the tree and took off back up it. His danger sense kicked in and he rolled along the path, a shuriken hitting where he had just been. His focus was lost for about 5 seconds, and that was enough for him to fall off the tree. Naruto glanced over to Jiraiya's outstretched arm, before plucking the shuriken out from the tree. It wasn't deep enough to be a major cut had he been hit. At worst, he would actually have to use his medical jutsu. He dropped the throwing star before starting back up the tree. This time, he was expecting the projectile and leapt out of the way again, barely sticking to the tree. By the time Jiraiya called it a day, Naruto had been able to keep it for over an hour. He did have a few cuts, some minor and some that had to be healed right away. While he would usually object to this sort of training, he felt more alert than he had before. The next day, he started to walk on water. It took him several tries to get it, and a few hours before he could do it as proficiently as he could with the surface walking. The third day was when Jiraiya started to throw things at him, surprising the old pervert by how fast Naruto was learning. On the fourth day of the first week, Jiraiya had Naruto sign the Toad contract, and they got to work on summoning. Naruto quickly realized that summoning was not a walk in the park like Jiraiya made it out to be. It took a great deal of chakra, and concentration. Despite this, however, Naruto persevered. Summoning. He cried out, slapping his hand down for the last time that day, sweat pouring off his forehead from the tax on his reserves. A cloud of smoke obscured his vision, and when it cleared, laughing at the sight of an orange toad wearing a blue jacket and having black markings. Yo! I'm Gamakichi. You must be the new summoner that's been summoning the tadpoles. Naruto laughed a bit more. Yeah, that's been me. Naruto Uzumaki. He said, holding his hand out to the toad that shook it with his webbed hand. So, got any snacks? Gamakichi asked, looking around to where he had been summoned, surprised to see the old pervert. Pop's been wanting to talk to you. Jiraiya said something about giving you a beating. He's been pissed off most of the day, right around the time the kid signed the contract. Jiraiya winced, something that didn't go unnoticed by Naruto. Something you want to tell me? Naruto asked, tapping his foot a bit. Jiraiya scratched the back of his neck, muttering about how the blonde was a lot like his dad with that stance. Okay, Gamabunta, the toad boss, liked your dad as a better summoner. He's been getting on me in recent years about how I need to take care of you, and train you to be a legend like your old man. Jiraiya said. He couldn't blame the old toad. After all, he knew his reputation was somewhat questionable. Naruto felt a flare of anger. He felt Kyuubi's chakra swirl around him, flowing into him. Before Jiraiya could speak to try and calm him, Naruto swiped his thumb across his canine, slicing it open and speeding through the hand signs. Summoning. He yelled out, slapping his hand to the ground, where a large cloud of smoke was seen. Jiraiya. Where are you, you perverted sage? The form of the giant red boss toad known as Gamabunta was obviously not a happy sight for Jiraiya. Later, Naruto walked the halls of the hospital, having dropped Jiraiya off after a toad smackdown. Poor fool. Naruto had no qualms about allowing his anger to flare over such a thing, but he did admit he needed to get it under his control. So how's the runt doing? Naruto heard a beautiful voice and his head turned to look behind him, seeing a woman with her hair done up in a ponytail. Naruto could see the Chunin vest and turned a bit more to get a good look at the woman. His eyes roamed lower, enjoying the sight of her toned legs, and more importantly the firm full that begged a man to grab a hold and squeeze it. Granted, he wouldn't do that unless she wanted him to. Kiba's fine. A bruised ego and some minor fractures are the worst of his injuries. With Konoha's doctors, he'll be patched up in no time. Hana. The other voice was older, slightly more rough but also obviously female. From the room the two women were standing by walking out 4 dogs, one with an eye patch. Naruto went over, rubbing the back of his head a bit. So Kiba is alright? Naruto asked, knowing it was a bit rude to be walking into their business. I hope I didn't mess him up too badly. Both of the women showed a brief look of surprise. You're worried you messed him up too badly. That's nice of you. The older of the two women said. Most don't think about the fact they're fighting a comrade sometimes during the Chunin exams. Naruto scratched the back of his head. Well yeah, at the time I didn't think of him as a comrade, or even a friend. But I did hear the sound of something cracking when I kicked him, so I want to make sure he's okay. He's a friend and a comrade, and I don't want to cripple him or kill him just to advance my own career. The older woman gave a feral smirk. That's a good thinking kid, and Kiba will be fine. I'm his mother, Tsume, and this is his sister, Hana. Naruto glanced over to Hana and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Naruto Uzumaki. He said, shortly before his stomach let itself be known by roaring out in hunger. Naruto scratched at the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry, I've been working on training all day. He said a little sheepishly. Tsume looked at Naruto a bit. Hey, you're fighting Neji Gaki in the finals, right? The one that hospitalized Kiba's teammate Hinata. Naruto nodded his eyes. I know he's a comrade, but what he did was unforgivable, and I'm going to do my very best to tear him to pieces. He said, clenching his hands tight. As you should, Hinata's a pretty good girl and what happened to her shouldn't have happened, especially not from family. Hana said from beside Naruto. Maybe I could give you some pointers, you know. I'm a Chunin and I've been at it for a while, so I obviously know what the judges are looking for. Naruto looked surprised. Yeah, he was learning some pretty cool stuff from Jiraiya, but he wasn't exactly learning tactics to be promoted. Are you sure? I don't want to interrupt your schedule or anything. Tsume put a hand on Naruto's head. I'm sure it would be fine, it would even be a good learning experience for you Gaki. Hell, I can help too. Why don't you come over for dinner? It would give us a chance to talk, strategize, and it would be my way of thanking you for not damaging Kiba too badly. Naruto's stomach roared again in agreement with the offer of food. Well, if you're sure. Naruto said and rubbed the back of his head again, smiling a bit. Who was he to say no to free food, advice, and the company of 2 hot women? Naruto followed behind the 2 women, and in front of the 3 dogs that were at his back. They were sniffing at him, and he glanced back at them. So who are these guys, or girls? Naruto asked. He knew of Akamaru. Oh shit, he said suddenly. How's Akamaru? He's not hurt is he? He asked. Hana shook her head, the ponytail of brown hair swishing around and catching Naruto's eyes. Not at all, a few minor punctures from needles and a mild case of chakra exhaustion, but other than that he's perfectly fine. In fact, he was running around today. Naruto looked relieved. Awesome, I didn't want to hurt the little guy, but I had to end the match. Tsume nodded. Younger Inuzuka, and their partners, are often distracted by the danger of the other. Your trick likely wouldn't have worked had Akamaru been Kuromaru's size. She said, motioning to the large black wolf-like dog with the eye patch. Kuromaru's my partner, and has been ever since he was a pup. I've also managed to learn your ways of talking. Kuromaru said, though his voice was deep, like a growl, surprising Naruto thoroughly. The other three are my partners, the Heimaru brothers. Hana said, patting one's head as it moved up for attention. Naruto never noticed some discreet growls from the one over which Hana petted. Hana gave a smirk as her nin dog told her what she suspected about the blonde's hormones coming off of him in waves. She then began to walk with a little extra sway to her hips. Now Naruto never considered himself to be a pervert, not in the sense like Ebisu, the Sandaime Hokage, Kakashi, and certainly not like Jiraiya. But when you have a hot woman walking in front of you, with her hips swaying to show off that round hug by those tight shorts, well, he had a guy reaction. His eyes were naturally drawn to it a little longer than he would have liked. Hell, he could have sworn that he could see the outline of a thong through those tight pants. Tsume had heard her daughter's nin dog, and even seen her daughter walk with a bit more purpose to her step. She discreetly glanced back to see Naruto's cerulean eyes drawn to her daughter's, just like her daughter no doubt planned for them to be. She wanted to laugh at the poor blonde, but decided she'd tease him herself. She swung her hips a bit more, not a whole lot, but just a tiny bit more to show off her own full round being hugged by the shinobi pants she wore. Naruto noticed the two full round females swinging in front of him, not overt like he had seen Mikoto do on occasion, but rather subtle, just enough to garner his attention, and damned if it wasn't working. But he wasn't a complete idiot anymore either. He knew he still had a lot to learn about women and life in general, but he wasn't stupid. You're both messing with me, aren't you? He suddenly asked the two women as they entered the Inuzuka clan compound. Don't worry Gaki, we started it, you're allowed to look. Tsume said with a feral grin. Kiba's father had died during the Kyuubi attack. It wasn't something she held against Naruto, but she hadn't gotten anything in that long. The blonde staring at her was just fine. Besides, you're kinda cute. Hana said, ruffling Naruto's hair. A bit flaky, but you'll grow I'm sure. Tsume had to stifle a laugh. She knew who the blonde was, knew who his parents were. It wasn't hard really. Kuromaru even mentioned his smell one time, but Tsume told the nin dog to keep it quiet. The fact Hana was calling him flaky was hilarious considering Kushina used to call Minato that all the time, even when they had started to date. They entered the rather large house that was for the clan head and their family. Kuromaru and the Heimaru triplets trotted off, no doubt to get some food or rest. Tsume headed into the kitchen and started to cook up some meat for the group. Hana headed up the stairs, muttering something about getting out of the Chunin vest. Naruto, not knowing where to go, followed Tsume into the kitchen. He watched her cook, taking a deep inhale through his nose and enjoying the scent of the meat and spices mixing. Anything I can do to help? He asked. Tsume shook her head. I got it, why don't you take a seat? She asked. Naruto glanced over to the table and sat down, just as Hana walked into the kitchen. She still wore the shorts but the Chunin vest was gone, showing off the black tank top that was snug against her rather ample chest. Her hair was also out of the ponytail, hanging loose. Feel better? Naruto asked. Hana nodded. Like you wouldn't believe. Chunin vests are pretty much one size fits all, and unfortunately I fall under that category that I couldn't have mine custom made. Sure, I could get one custom made, but it's ridiculously expensive. The vests are meant to last you for years, even mom still wears her original one. Naruto looked surprised to hear that, but supposed he could see that. And if they get damaged? He asked curiously. Tsume answered. Jiraiya-sama answered that back when he was a chunin, he came up with a design for a self-repair seal that was fairly simple to make and work into the material of the vests. Because it was during wartime, such a seal was invaluable, making the vests last that much longer, and take that much more punishment. Naruto rolled that little nugget of information around in his head. That was an impressive feat, he was sure. I take it you're chesty enough for your vest to give you problems, but not chesty enough to have a custom made. Naruto asked Hana for clarification. Hana nodded. That about sums it up. It's a pain with a bra, which is why I've had to take to binding. Naruto blinked twice. Your problems are utterly alien to me. It's like a bear trying to explain to a shark that its knees hurt. Hana laughed a little bit. Consider yourself lucky to be a man, it is a pain sometimes. But are also capable of making all men act alike. Tsume said as she walked over and sat down, letting the meat cook a little while. Anyways, what's your game plan for Neji? She asked Naruto. Naruto smacked himself in the forehead. He knew it was still early, but damn it. Jiraiya hasn't gotten me to work on a game plan yet. Chakra control and summoning, but no strategy. Tsume looked surprised. You're training under Jiraiya-sama. Naruto shrugged. A little, yeah, he got put in the hospital after Gamabunta gave him a beat down. Tsume gave a snort of laughter. Alright Gaki, what do you know about Neji's fighting style? Admittedly, not a whole lot was what he knew. However, he had been there for the match between Neji and Hinata, so he closed his eyes to think about it. He didn't use any jutsu, not even substitution or the basic clone jutsu. Naruto said. This leads me to believe he's pure taijutsu, which would make him dangerous in close quarters. Tsume nodded. You're right. The Hyuga clan does specialize in jutsu, and are very forward fighters. No doubt he knows the basic three, but doesn't use them. Naruto rolled that around in his head. He has to have a defensive ability, something to defend against long-ranged attacks or something he's working on. There's no way he's fast enough to dodge everything thrown at him. Assume so. The way I see it, you have two options. First, bombard him with long-range jutsu until he can't use his defense anymore. Second, you move in for a forward attack, and use your clones to flank his sides and back. Tsume said. There's just one problem with that. Hana interjected. His Byakugan allows for 360-degree vision, so there won't be flanking him. Naruto worked this over, working over what he knew, what he could learn, what he usually carried with him in his ninja pouch. A third option is to confront him in a frontal attack. Naruto said. Only, I would want a longer and more efficient range. I need to use a sword, a staff, something that would make it difficult for him to get a beat on me. Tsume looked surprised before nodding. That would work. But could you learn how to efficiently use a staff or sword in a month? She asked. Not to mention, his teammate is a weapons mistress in training. Naruto said and put his palm to his eye, rubbing a bit. I need something I can learn with proficiency. How about learning to use seals? Hana asked. There's something different. The judges would look favorably on you using something other than the shadow clone jutsu, and you have a renowned seal master as your teacher for this month. Naruto thought about the information. His sealing abilities were pretty high in the game, but he still needed someone to teach him about seals. That might work, he said slowly. Tsume nodded. Next match I believe will be you against either the Uchiha Kid, or that Gaara. Let's think about them. Naruto thought a bit. Gaara doesn't show the use of any taijutsu or genjutsu. It seems he uses his sand and that's it. An impenetrable defense that he doesn't even have to think about to get it to defend him. If I can somehow get rid of his defense, I also remove his offense. He used his sand to crush Lee's arm and leg. But getting rid of all that sand won't be easy. Tsume stood up, moving to check the meat. I'll give you this one as a freebie. Water. Tsume said as she flipped the meat. Lots and lots of water. Weigh his sand down so that it won't react as quickly. I bet he can't even swim, or walk on water. Sasuke is being trained by Kakashi-sensei, so he could come back knowing 10 more jutsu. Naruto said and sighed. But he's good at his family's taijutsu, he's good at fire ninjutsu, he's good with throwing projectiles, and he has his Sharingan to help anticipate his moves. Naruto didn't like Sasuke using said eyes, but he knew they were just another tool in Sasuke's arsenal. And his opponent is Gaara. Hana said. Kakashi-san will likely build Sasuke's speed up so he won't get killed right off the bat. Naruto put a finger to his chin thinking. A light flicked on in his head. With Sasuke, all I need to do is turn it into a battle of attrition. He said suddenly, getting Tsume's attention. How so? She asked, walking over and sitting back down. Doing that could ruin his chances at becoming a Chunin. Well, Sasuke's going to put his all into surviving and beating Gaara. Naruto said. Afterwards, he's going to be tired. Even if he gets a break during the next matches, he'll still be sore and tired. I'm a stamina machine, I've outran Jonin and Chunin after my pranks. I'll be fine to go. Sasuke will have likely exhausted most of his chakra. Hana nodded some, understanding. So you'll use your superior stamina to keep away from him. It takes more energy to attack and miss than it does to dodge or block. Naruto nodded, that was exactly right. So that leaves Shino, Gaara's brother and sister, and that Dosu guy. Tsume looked surprised. Why didn't you include that Nara kid? He could surprise you by meeting you in the finals. Naruto shook his head. No way, not Shika's style. He'll likely win his first match so thoroughly, but give up, or forfeit before it even begins. He's the laziest person I know. Tsume nodded, impressed that Naruto had Shikaku's kid pegged. Okay, let's work with Shino. Naruto paused as he thought about it. With either Gaara or Sasuke, Naruto would likely be a little tired after the match. I could summon a toad. Naruto said. Shino used bugs, toads liked bugs. Gaara's brother, Kankuro, was it? Hana asked. Puppeteer, if I get in close I should be able to have the advantage. Naruto said. Temari. Tsume asked. It seemed the kid would be at an advantage against most of the other fighters. Naruto thought of that one. She uses wind with that fan, so she's probably dangerous at long range, but her body shows she's not above fighting at close range with it. He closed his eyes, thinking. I'll have to catch her by surprise, which means I'll likely win that match. Dosu. Hana asked, leaning forward with a small grin. The kid had potential to be a Chunin on the first try. Naruto rolled that one through his head. Dosu was going to be a bitch. Uses sound-based techniques from that bracer. Vibrations, who's to say that he can't make even larger vibrations and cause minor tremors? He asked. Close range, he's dangerous. I'll have to fight at long range, overwhelm him. Tsume nodded, getting up to finish the food. Well kid, sounds like you got your game plans all set up. She said as she began to dish out the food. Naruto graciously accepted the plate of steak and steamed vegetables. He began to eat it, picking slowly at it. He didn't like the vegetables, but didn't want to insult Tsume. When he was finished, he took the plate to the sink and rinsed it off. Hana and Tsume both finished soon after and did the same. Naruto wanted to sigh a bit. He was in the company of two very hot women and didn't get to do anything. He immediately wanted to bash Jiraiya's face in because he was turning into a pervert and he wanted to blame it on Jiraiya. Tsume had smelled Naruto's hormones at night, and it had been slowly getting her horny. Hearing the gem that was underneath as the boy showed his intelligence had also appealed to her. She noticed the hungry look Hana was also giving the boy. Oh, what the hell, come here. She grabbed Naruto by the front of his orange jacket and pulled him into a hungry kiss, nipping at his lips. She was a little disappointed when she felt him timidly kiss her back. Naruto was working on instinct, and was shocked as Tsume kissed him. It was why he was timid in kissing her back. Soon, however, his brain rebooted and he grabbed the one that had teased him all the way from the hospital and squeezed hard as he began to kiss with more vigor. When Tsume let out a small whimper sound, Naruto pressed against her chest, biting her lower lip and pulling with his teeth. Damn it, Mom! Hana yelled, pouting a bit. I wanted to do that to him, she said and growled a bit at seeing her mother cupping Naruto's groin. Naruto pulled away from Tsume carefully so he didn't hurt himself. He then grabbed Hana by the hips. Don't worry, I have plenty for both of you. He whispered against her lips before kissing her, working his tongue into her mouth as he grabbed, feeling that she was indeed wearing a thong. Instead of being put off by the fact Naruto claimed he could do both of them, Hana was instead aroused. That kind of stamina would be legendary. To two Inuzuka women, Naruto would be praised by perverts everywhere. Despite this though, she would make him work for the right to dominate her. She bit and nipped at his tongue, battling it with her own as she rubbed her hand against Naruto's groin. The brief surprise at the size gave him the chance to work her tongue into submission. With the small tongue war ended, she submissively stayed on Naruto's tongue. She would keep fighting for the top spot, but for now he won. Naruto was a bit surprised when his head was pulled away from Hana's and into the bear of Tsume. He nuzzled his head into them, enjoying the size. They were definitely bigger than Mikoto's, he would say that much to himself. Naruto turned his head to a large nipple, sticking up and begging for attention. He knew dominating both of these women on his own would not be easy. With that in mind, he put his hands in the cross-shaped hand sign and summoned a shadow clone. The clone moved over to Hana and grabbed, resuming the kiss. The clone then moved his hands from her up to her chest, molesting her a bit with his hands. He then grabbed her tank top and tore it open, bearing her bound. The bandages were next to be torn away, one hand moving and pinching Hana's nipple. Tsume felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that the blonde needed a clone to dominate both herself and her daughter. Briefly, she wondered if the blonde would be able to dominate them both. Tsume undid Naruto's pants, and pulled out his hard, still impressed by his rather large size. Dropping to her knees, she pushed before working them up and down, on the swollen tip, savoring the salty taste. Hana pulled back, and watched her mother drop to her knees. She figured it would be a good way to wrap the blonde around her finger. Following her mother's example, Hana dropped to her knees and then undid the clone's pants, pulling him out. Hana reached up and cupped the clone's balls, fondling them as she worked her mouth around the tip, flicking her tongue around it in circles a bit before taking it deeper. She brushed her hair back with her spare hand, and held it back as she began to bob her head on and off the clones. She was surprised at the taste, but wouldn't complain. The real Naruto clenched his teeth, in his breath a bit as he felt Tsume pressed firmly around his thigh. The soft flesh rubbed up and down on his while her wet tongue flicked over his tip. He squeezed his hands at his sides a bit, before being bold. He brought one hand up and grabbed Tsume's hair, giving a low groan as he felt her moan, the vibrations running against his. The clone was doing much the same as the original. He clenched his hands at his sides, groaning as he watched Hana deep throat all but 2 inches. He hissed in pleasure as she slowly came back, dragging her teeth gently against his. The clone grabbed her by the back of the head, eliciting a warning growl from Hana. The clone looked down at her and smacked. If he was going to dominate them both, he needed to take this at his own pace. She whimpered and tried growling again, but the clone smacked the other in retaliation. She whimpered again, and this time didn't growl. Tsume couldn't believe the balls on the kid, figuratively speaking. As an Inuzuka, she was a proud woman, and usually the dominant one. Of course, that didn't mean she was above using such things like pleasuring the male to attempt to keep him in line. Instead, the blonde saw past her idea, grabbed her head and began to bob it on and off his, making her take 2 inches of his repeatedly. She could have given a warning growl, like Hana did, but she was sure the blonde would just slap her to keep her in line. Hana wanted to take command, to show this clone that she would be the dominant. And while it may seem rather weak of her to submit after only 2 slaps to her, she would continue to challenge both the original and the clone as they progressed. As an Inuzuka, she knew that a battle of dominance was meant to be quick and short. If it was long and drawn out, then the pleasure would take forever to build, and no one would get anywhere they wanted to get to. With this in mind, she rolled her eyes up to look at the clone as she relaxed her throat and went down to the very base of the. She could feel her gag reflex wanting to kick in, but she held it back as she reached out with her tongue and rubbed it against the clone's balls. The real Naruto could feel his impending orgasm. He could feel the desire to release his cum in Tsume's mouth, beginning to build in his balls. With this thought in mind, he moved from her impressiveness and grabbed her hair tighter, eliciting a whimper and a moan from the Inuzuka matriarch. Naruto then began to work her head on and off his, thrusting his hips a bit until Tsume was down all the way on his. He could feel her throat spasm as she gagged a bit, but he grit his teeth holding back his orgasm just a little while longer. The clone looked over to his creator. The sight of a hot MILF like Tsume on her knees, topless and deep-throating was rather arousing. The clone turned back to Hana who was showing her own skills at massaging him and licking his balls all at the same time. He could feel his own impending orgasm, and began to work his hips back and forth, making Hana take him a little faster. Tsume could feel the blonde's orgasm approaching. She could feel it in the desperation of the thrusts, the way his shaft would give slight spasms. She pulled back to the tip and began to swirl her tongue around the head of Naruto's, her hand reaching up and jerking the shaft. She gave a low groan, just as the blonde threw his head back in a loud moan. She felt her cheeks bloat up with the load of cum, and quickly began to swallow the salty treat, jerking her hand faster to make sure she got every last drop that Naruto could give her. Hana glanced over to her mother, watching as she swallowed the blonde's load. She glanced up to the heavily breathing clone and knew that he was just as close as his creator. She lowered her head from the tip towards the base, slowly so her teeth grazed against the shaft, and her wet tongue pressed firmly against the bottom of it as she made her way lower, holding eye contact with the clone as she did. She forced down the urge to gag as he came in her throat. She hadn't expected him to go so quickly, but she supposed it could have been worse. She swallowed the cum, her throat muscles milking the thick shaft. Naruto glanced over to his clone as he felt Tsume withdraw from him. "Swap me," he said before moving over towards Hana. He held his hands down to help her back up to her feet. He then picked her up, his hands on her as he laid her down on the kitchen table. Standing back up, he noticed the surprise on her face. "What? You thought a blow job would finish me off?" he asked before removing the shorts and, much to his suspicion, the red thong she wore. He also noticed she was glistening with her moisture. Naruto rubbed his against her a bit, eliciting a few mewling sounds from her before he pushed in, savoring the feel of her tightness. He jumped a bit when he saw Tsume almost thrown onto the table beside him, her arms pinned behind her back. The Naruto clone had almost been attacked by Tsume, who had leapt at him ready to take control for herself. The clone had a different plan and after a brief struggle behind the creator, the clone managed to pin Tsume down to the table, with both hands behind her back. The clone then thrust hard and deep, savoring the feel of the MILFs. He didn't savor long before he started at a hard and fast pace. She was looser than many of the other girls he had been with, but that didn't mean she wasn't pleasurable to be inside. It just meant he could be a little rougher and planned on being so. He pinned her arms with one hand and slapped, enticed by how it jiggled as he gave it another slap. Tsume moaned as she felt the blonde's body use it. She felt like a bitch in heat with him, and had hoped to dominate his clone to show who the alpha was. Instead, she was bent over with her arms pinned, her face against the table, with the blonde stamina freak pounding into her wet and slapping her at the same time. She knew she wasn't as tight as say Hana, but that didn't mean she didn't clench her inner muscles around the invading to try and pleasure the blonde. If he had an orgasm first, then she would still be the alpha. But she hadn't had any in over a decade. It would be an uphill battle, especially with the blonde slapping. Unlike her mother, Hana wasn't quite so restricted in what she could do. She bucked against Naruto, giving soft moans as she felt the blonde's large push deep into her body with every thrust. He was certainly bigger than any of her past lovers, but those damned civilians in bed anyways. She reached up with her nails, and raked them down Naruto's chest, one of them hooking on the zipper of his jacket and pulling it down. She licked her lips a bit. The blonde had lean muscles, some she could thoroughly appreciate. She would have preferred perhaps a bit more muscle, but he was using all of what he had to properly pound into her. She raked her nails down his chest again, tearing the mesh under armor and causing light cuts to appear. Naruto winced a little bit, feeling Hana cut into his skin. That wasn't going to keep happening. He grabbed Hana's hands and pinned them down over her head, forcing her to stick out more. He began to thrust harder into Hana, forcing her hips up off the table as he took her with force. He locked eyes with her as he lowered his mouth and bit down on her nipple, pulling with his teeth and causing her to whimper. Naruto's clone wasn't sitting around either. He lifted his leg up and planted his foot on the table, forcing his hips to thrust at a downward angle. To compensate, he worked an arm up under Tsume's stomach and lifted upwards, forcing her up higher while he thrust into her body, giving slight grunts as the table rocked. He used his grip on her arms as additional leverage as he drove himself into her body, over and over. Tsume gritted her teeth as she felt the blonde clone step up his game. Oh sweet Kami, what the hell was she thinking in trying to dominate the blonde? She cried out in pleasure, feeling her orgasm closing in on her with every thrust. She closed her eyes, attempting to keep in control of her body, but with the pounding inside her body, she wasn't given any breaks and it was wearing her down quickly. Hana whimpered as she felt the blonde's mouth move away. No, no, don't stop. She whispered, trying to move her arms to draw his head back. She had never felt so powerless to not get what she wanted, and it was driving her crazy. She arched her back, trying to get more from the blonde. She rolled her hips, trying to get the blonde to push deeper. Naruto had watched how his clone was steadily pounding into Tsume and driving her closer to an orgasm with every thrust, dominating her body, and had decided to do something different to Hana. He took away from her, making her need him much more. He soon grabbed her hips, releasing her hands as he began to pound in and out of her, the sound of flesh smacking against flesh being heard over and over as he drove his into Hana, feeling her tighten with every thrust. Her back arched and she let out a howl as she had an orgasm that bowed her back. Naruto felt the tightened wet walls of Hana's constrict around his and leaned down, kissing them a little bit. At the peak of her orgasm, and just as his own started, he sank his teeth into Hana's until he drew blood, marking her as the beta. The clone watched as its creator marked Hana. Boss, not to distract you or anything, but I don't think we'll be topping Tsume. The clone said. He was close to his own orgasm, and damned if he wasn't sure how he was going to get the Inuzuka matriarch to come before he did. It was taking a lot of effort just to hold her in place. Tsume let out a smirk of victory as she squeezed her inner walls. While she had, at first, been close to being dominated, she was not going to go down so easily. It took most of her shinobi training that had put her as the alpha of the Inuzuka clan to help her concentrate on something other than the pleasure she was getting, but in the end, it allowed her to slowly edge the clone closer to his orgasm before she would have her own. Hana watched her mother, a bit conflicted as she came down from her orgasm. On one hand, she felt that she should allow her mother a moment of triumph over the blonde. On the other hand, she felt that she should help her newly proclaimed alpha dominate her mother. Either way, she could get in trouble. Hana licked her lips, watching the feral smirk of her mother broaden a bit. Spank her, and pull her hair. Hana said. Spanking is a fetish of most Inuzuka women that's not really known except to us. The real Naruto glanced down at Hana and gave her a kiss on the lips. Thanks, he said before moving to the other side of the table. He grabbed Tsume's arms and pulled them out in front of her, giving his clone the use of his arms once more. Do it, he told his clone. The clone nodded before he grabbed a hold of Tsume's hair, making her whimper in pleasure and give a slight groan. The clone grit his teeth, wishing he could bite his lip but knowing that would only dispel himself. He then used his right hand, his stronger hand, to slap Tsume's, making her cry out in pleasure. He felt her tighten up in response to the spanking and the hair pulling. He slapped her again, making her buck and roll her hips backwards against his hips. Tsume looked over at her daughter. Traitor, she said, crying out again as she was spanked again. While as a mother she was proud her daughter had the backbone to go against her like that, as the proud Inuzuka clan head she was rather upset. Tsume cried out again, as the blonde clone pounding into her began to punish her by spanking it until it was bright red. She let out a howl of pleasure, and felt teeth press into her shoulder as hot cum spilled inside her body, mixing with her fluids as she was dominated through the combined efforts of her daughter's help and the blonde stud. Hana grinned when she saw her mother get a matching bite mark. Sorry mom, she said and patted her on the back. At least you got a good out of being dominated, she said and got up off the table, slowly due to the dull pain in her abdomen from the blonde's rather vigorous. Naruto released Tsume and watched as she also moved from the table, his clone coming over to stand beside the creator. Tsume walked over, and knelt before the creator, kissing his head. You know I'm about to have a large orgasm when my clone dispels, don't you? He asked, getting a nod in return. Hana soon made her way over, kneeling alongside her mother. Naruto nodded to his clone, watching it poof out. Naruto felt the ache in his balls already start as they compensated for the memories of all the pleasure, and he came. He pumped his, splattering both women on the face and coating the red fang markings on their cheeks. Tsume wiped some of the hot cum off her cheek and on her finger, savoring the taste. Alright Naruto, I think you should keep this a secret from Kiba, and probably everyone else. If it's found out that I've been dominated, I would have to step down as clan head to you. While you would likely make a good clan head, I don't think you're quite ready for that responsibility yet. Hana was a little surprised at that little tidbit and wiped the cum from her own cheek as she stood up. So essentially at any time he could come and take your spot if he wanted. She asked her mother. Naruto shook his head. That's not happening, he said. I'm going to revive the Uzumaki clan and that would be a moot point if I ever became clan head of the Inuzuka clan. He said. Tsume nodded. Still, just keep it quiet. We don't need any political problems, alright? She said. Naruto gave a slight salute. Well, I need to get home, he told the two women. I'm exhausted and need some sleep. He then leaned over, giving Tsume a kiss before doing the same to Hana. He then settled his clothes and zipped his shirt up. He then waved as he walked off and out the door. He took to the rooftops, opening the game book as he went. Congratulations. You had with Hana Inuzuka. Plus 900 points plus 5 medical jutsu. Naruto banked the level up. Congratulations. You had with Tsume Inuzuka. Plus 1000 points plus 5 taijutsu. Congratulations. You got the bronze top fox medal. Plus 600 points plus 2 acrobatics. Congratulations. You got the silver top fox medal. Plus 1200 points plus 3 acrobatics. Naruto banked the second level up with a bit of a grin. He was that much closer to getting what he wanted. Congratulations. You had with 5 kunoichi. Plus 800 points plus 5 ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu. Congratulations. You had with 3 Jonin level kunoichi. Plus 1000 points plus 5 ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu. Congratulations. You got the bronze leaf man medal. Plus 800 points. Naruto banked the third level up, surprised at the fact he was getting so much. Congratulations. You got the bronze evened up medal. Plus 900 points. Congratulations. You got the bronze MILF Hunter medal. Plus 1000 points. Congratulations. You had with a mother and daughter at the same time. Plus 600 points. Naruto banked the final level up, noticing he wasn't getting anything else. Naruto flipped to the medals. First, he won the Top Fox medal. Top Fox, bronze. Dominate Hana Inuzuka and mark her as beta. Top Fox, silver. Dominate Tsume Inuzuka and mark her as beta. That made sense to Naruto, so he tapped the Leaf Man medal. Leaf Man, bronze. I have 5 women from Konoha. Naruto then tapped the Evened Up medal. Evened Up, bronze. With 2 women, using 1 shadow clone for assistance. Naruto then tapped the MILF Hunter medal. MILF Hunter, bronze. Have 3 MILFs. Naruto paused on top of his apartment as he headed over to the stat page. He had 40 points to use. 5 from each level he gained. 17, 18, 19, and 20. Half of those 5 per level, so an additional 10 points. Then an additional 10 points for getting to level 20. Naruto poured 20 points into his acrobatics, bringing it up to the required level with the bonuses he got from the Top Fox medals. He then poured the other 20 points into his speed, feeling a sense of accomplishment as he got the Hirishin. In his haste, he forewent the skills for now. He tapped on the Hirishin, and quickly accepted it. Hirishin Jutsu version 1. You can now teleport randomly within 5 meters of a Hirishin marker. Naruto's jaw dropped as a scroll popped out in a puff of smoke. He was so damned close, only to basically get bitch slapped in the very end. He opened the scroll, to see a storage seal at the bottom and detailed instructions in layman's terms of how to use the Hirishin Jutsu. Perk unlocked. Hirishin Jutsu version 2. Requirements. Hirishin Jutsu version 1. Speed 100, Chakra Control 100, Chakra Levels 100, Intelligence 75, Acrobatics 75, Ceiling 125. It took all of Naruto's limited patience to keep from screaming out in fury. It would be another 10 levels minimum before he got the second version of the Hirishin Jutsu. While he was there, he went ahead and selected the Rinnegan and got it, practically whimpering as he realized he got his hopes up for nothing. With a sigh, he headed to the skills, hoping maybe he could get something that would cheer him up. Bonus from medals. He watched the points flow down, boosting his point values. Naruto boosted his ninja master up to 100, putting him at adept level. Kenjutsu was boosted by 50 as well, putting him at expert. Perk added. Naruto glanced at the words before flipping over to the perks. Kenjutsu style. Hidden Mitsurugi Ryu. Requirements. Kenjutsu 150, Speed 150. Allows use of the Hidden Mitsurugi Ryu Kenjutsu style, the ultimate speed Kenjutsu style that uses god-like speed and precision to strike your foes down. Naruto was impressed, nodding to himself at the thought of using that kind of style. It would be brutal to have, but he wasn't getting it for some time. He flipped back to the skills. He then rounded out ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu to 100 each. He got a perk added message when he leveled up taijutsu and headed over towards the perks. Taijutsu style. Snake style. Requirements. Acrobatics 50, Speed 50, Taijutsu 100, have with Anko Mitarashi. Allows use of the snake style of taijutsu which utilizes speed, precision, and flexibility. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and accepted the perk, a scroll appearing in a puff of smoke, having a golden snake motif wrapped around it. He opened it up to see the forms of the snake style. Naruto then flipped back to the skills, then poured his remaining 54 points into his sexual aura. Sexual aura. Expert level. Enemy kunoichi won't slit your throat. Your aura now affects the biju themselves. Naruto ran a hand through his hair, nodding at that. He closed the book and stared up at the skies, thinking about the upcoming exams a bit more, and wondering if it was fair he had such easy training. So friends, this was episode 2 of this epic alternate universe adventure. If you enjoyed it and want episode 3 soon, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down your thoughts. Which new ally do you think will have the biggest impact on Naruto's growing alliance, and what challenge should he face next? I'll see you in the next episode.